Want to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. And I am done. Okay, so I just got finished reading Blood Song. This is book 1 of Raven's Shadow by Anthony Ryan, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts about finishing this book, which was just right now. So this book's amazing. This is so good. This is a top 10 maybe best book that I've ever read, certainly top 20. And I think I'd have to really go back and look, but I think it's the best first book to a series that I've ever read in my life. It's crazy. I mean, this book that is a independently published book by an author that I've literally never heard of in my life up until a couple months ago stands up there with like the titans of this genre, with the Sandersons and the Rothfuss and Martin and Erickson, etc. I mean, it contends with those, with how amazing this quality is. I can't believe it. I don't know that I've ever been so shocked before at how good a book is. That really kind of hit me out of nowhere. This book was recommended to me because somebody finally won my TBR contest twice. I do this contest every month where you have to vote. I mean, I don't, hold a gun to your head, but if you want to, you can vote on what you think I'm going to rank the books that I read that month. And the person that gets the closest, or the top 3 that get the closest, win. And if you win twice, you get to pick a book for me to read. So the first time this happened, and this is the book. So I can't wait for people to win. Hopefully they recommend me good stuff like this. But I can't imagine anything ever topping this. And it also, I had heard about it about a month or two before that. Because I did this video a little while back where I had my fans all vote on what their favorite fantasy books of all time were. I really wanted to get a sense for what my viewers believe the greatest books are. And this one was rated number 71. And it's the only book that was on that list that I'd never heard of before. And it looked good. It kind of had this kind of darker kind of look to it. When I looked up a couple really basic things about it, it looked like it kind of fit the mold for what I liked. But I got a little cocky, and I'm like, look, I've never heard of it before. I review fantasy books. I read, well over 100 a year. I've read hundreds and hundreds of fantasy books. I've never even heard of this. There's no way it's going to be that good, but it was. I'm just blown away, and I think that virtually anybody would get a wonderful experience out of this. I can't imagine anybody reading this and being like, that was a bad book. It really felt like, and maybe more than any other book that I've read, it felt like I read an entire series in this one 600-page book, in part due to the clever use of time skips. I'm a big fan of time skips. I wish more fantasy authors would use them. I know Fonda Lee did this in her Greenbone saga, particularly towards the end, and I thought it was expertly done. And I find that it's just such a clever way to advance your story along without getting sucked into trying to tell every single little thing. And then you end up in a George R. R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire type of situation where, he's simultaneously written himself into some holes that he can't seem to get himself out of, notably in the eastern continent of Essos. And also, the series would have been done by now if he had done that, because he was originally planning on doing that, but he just couldn't come to terms with that. I don't know the whole story behind it, but I know that was his plan, and we'd have it by now if he actually did that. And so, yeah, I love it. And it gives you this feeling, right, of like this huge epic scope that normally wouldn't be able to be accomplished if you just told the story from start to finish, because we got through a character, and I'll go more into the plot in a little bit, that starts off essentially at the beginning of this book joining a school. And if the story was told in a cohesive fashion, he wouldn't have finished up school by the time that we got to the end of this book. But we actually got to see like his whole arc take place because of this. And so that's awesome. So it's also kind of crazy to me, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but that this book is somehow so many different things at the same time. I mean, it's a slower paced book. It's like a coming of age story, but in like a school setting. But at the same time, it's like a page turner. It's impossible to put down. There's these hugely intense moments throughout. And to be able to like blend all of kind of concepts together is just, it's magnificent. I mean, we have at its core here a book that is like a mystery, political war book, coming of age story, all tied up into one. And that's awesome. I also want to mention, before I kind of go into the nitty gritty about this book, that I have heard relentlessly from people after I finished, got towards the last couple chapters of this book. I ended up being like, am I the only one kind of thinking this? Is this incredible to other people? And I read a couple reviews of it, and everyone says, stop the series there. Do not continue reading. It's horrible. The future books just ruin the whole series. And that's why it's not as popular as it should be. And what I will say to that is, I can't tell you if that's true or not. I am planning on reading those books, or at least the next one. But I can tell you that this book feels like it could be a standalone. I don't know where the next books are going to go. I have no idea. But this book could just be, you could be done and walk away and say, that's great. I will let you know if that's my recommendation to you in a few months when I read the next book. But I am also hoping, eagerly hoping, that I'm going to disagree with the masses, because I find myself often disagreeing with the masses, right? It's something I think a lot of people like about my channel, and maybe even more people hate, when I'll just really dislike something that's really popular, or I'll really love something that's really unpopular. And I try to go into things without this preconceived notion and just kind of let my own personal tastes dictate what I read and what I believe in things, and not try to get influenced by anything else. So I'm hoping that this is one of those moments where I end up, again, disagreeing with a lot of people and saying, yeah, this is awesome. But yeah, if you're one of those people that are worried about that kind of thing, don't. Just read the first one, and then, take it from there. So let's talk about the story a little bit. This book is told with a framing narrative. The best way I can explain framing narrative is think A Name of the Wind, where at the beginning of the book you have an author that is more in the present time, telling a story to somebody else and about their life. And I just love that. The Sun Eater does this to perfection by Christopher Rocchio. And it's just, I find it really clever oftentimes, the way that they're finding an excuse to tell a story. I love kind of getting a little spoiled on what's going to happen later, but it doesn't end up spoiling a lot of things, but it just kind of gives you a fun, fresh perspective on things, and I just can't get enough of it. I know it's a gimmick. I happen to love that gimmick. But we also get, as is often in these types of stories, particularly in The Name of the Wind, we will often get flashbacks. This book is kind of split up into parts. There's chapters, but there's also parts that are greater than a chapter. And after each one of those parts, we go back to the present time, where you have this character, Vaylin Alsorna, who has been captured by the enemy side. Think of two sides, a northern continent and a southern continent. Our character that we follow is from the northern one, and they try to take over the much, 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 much larger southern continent and seemingly lose. And Alsorna, who is a part of this army, you don't really know at this point what his role was, but he is some major, major war hero, but in the South is really vilified for doing this horrific act that we don't really understand what it is, but they call him the Hope Killer. And he is now telling his story to this chronicler who is wanting to know, from his perspective, why they invaded this country, or this continent, and what his life story was. And you keep kind of jumping back to that. So it's fun, seeing that framing, not telling it to somebody that's, friendly. It's telling it to somebody that is imprisoned them. And that's just really fun. So yeah, very engaging. But once you get that framing narrative out of the way and you jump to the real story, I'm not going to go very far into it. I don't like to spoil things on this channel, but I also find mentioning kind of what the first couple chapters were all about doesn't really spoil much at all, probably less than reading the back cover would do. But you get this character who's dropped off at a military school. It's kind of this, classic old school kind of fantasy feel to it, where there's no gunpowder or anything. There's not even seemingly magic at this point in the story. It's just, swords and armor and that sort of thing. But you've got these schools of these warriors that are like the elite warriors, and he gets dropped off there, abandoned by his family, to go live at the school forever. And he is no longer has a family. This new people are his family, and he'll be there for the rest of his life, learning to become an elite warrior, and then going off to serve this country and serve the king. And for a large part of the story, at least the first half, probably more, it's about that character's journey. That character trying to get stronger, but also, and more importantly, the familial bonds that he makes with the other people in his cohort. It really feels like he's joining a military, a modern day kind of military, where you become very, 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 very close with those that you got trained with. And it's really a coming of age story. And it's hard to put down. I will say that. Very, very, very difficult, because you get so invested in this character, invested in this story. But then you have these critical moments that happen that make you just, eyes peeled to what's going on. The world building here, the world doesn't get explored intensely like you might in like an epic fantasy story. And I don't know that this would be described as like an epic fantasy. This is more of kind of like I don't even know, more like kind of a grimdark, although it does have some kind of hope involved in it. So I don't even know if it's that. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, so I can't really describe it exactly right. But it didn't have this sprawling world that you get to investigate. It does have a very large map that you get to look at, but we don't go to a lot of places. But this world is very, very deep with the history. You have these major mysteries involved in the world that kind of get slowly unraveled over time, these epic legends that you get to learn about. I find the world building to be very well done, even though that you don't get this sprawling kind of sense that you do in some larger fantasy stories. The fantasy elements here I thought were great, because you don't really know that they exist through a large part of the story. And I won't tell you what it is. I wish I could, because it's really, really cool and inventive, because the magic here is somehow a blend of very, very basic on its core, but also intensely original. And when I learned about it and I finally figured out what was going on, and you start to get some peeling back and understanding why some previous things in the story happened, and now you're like, that makes a lot more sense now that I understand what this magic system's all about. And how has nobody done this before? It's very inventive, but again, simple. And I think that's great. Not everything has to be this intense, hard magic system that we know every single little piece of the rule and we all piece it together. You got to read a manual to try to figure out what's going on. Sometimes these softer magic systems where it's kind of a blend of the two. It's not like, oh, just boom, magic, accept it. But you get some explanation for it, but it's not kind of rooted in this perfectly explained setting. But you slowly get the drip feed of what it's all about. Even when you understand what it's all about, you still understand it more and more as the story goes along. And I love that. I hate heavy exposition. Is that what it's called? When the author just kind of lays it all out on there and says, hey, here's what it is. I want to explain it to you like a lecture. I like figuring it out slowly throughout the story, and that's what we get here. Let's talk about the characters a little bit. There's too many of them to really go into all of them, because, there is a good handful of characters at the school, and the teachers and these other schools that you get to spend time with, and the enemies. But the characters are where this story excels the most. I loved reading about this character's growing up story and learning to love and trust and this sense of abandonment. I loved learning about this character, this main character, but I also thoroughly loved learning more about these other people that were involved in his life. You don't get these, again, you don't get like what I see very often. I just read a book, 𝐒𝐿𝐥 𝐿𝐼𝐸, where, you get this little group together and then they all tell each other their stories and you understand their backgrounds, within a few pages. I love the slow unraveling of it. Can you tell I like a slow burn sometimes? But that's what happens here as well. And it makes you fall in love with these characters. It makes them feel more real. And that's truly at the heart what's going on here. But I loved it. The prose here, I thought, was simultaneously, and this is kind of being a theme of this, but it's easy, but also complex. You're not going to sit there and be like, what was just written? I'm not going to have to go pull out a thesaurus every other word. But it also feels very, very well done. Way above average. And yeah, so overall, this book is one of the better books that I've ever read. And as I'm thinking, though, about who would this book appeal to, what the easy answer would say is to say anybody. But what I'll say is I'll tell you kind of what I think this book is at its heart. If I can compare it to other books, maybe you'll get a little sense. But I get the feeling like this book is the easiest blend I could say of major books that you've probably heard of. It's kind of like a mix of A Name of the Wind with this single POV, this framing narrative to the book, along with the school setting. It's got all those things in it. But then you also have this A Song of Ice and Fire thing going on with it too, where you have these darker elements. It's not this lighthearted story, but it's more serious. And you have intense political themes going on through it that get kind of ramped up as you go along. And so, yeah, it's a nice blend of those two. I happen to love both of those things. I think most people love both of those things. And even if one of those things appeals to you, I think you'll like this. If you like both of those, I think you're going to love this. Check it out. This guy deserves your money. I greatly look forward to reading the next one, even though my expectations have been tampered a little bit. But yeah, check this out. It's awesome, and you deserve it. So thank you so much, and as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, My Book is Lit, Miranda's Bookshelf, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝗏𝑜rthodoxia, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Anna, Andrea, Angelo, Blair, Brock, Evan, Harry B, Joe, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, 𝗏𝑜rthodoxie, and Zion. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.